I want to just let our attendees know that being part of the live audience for a comp title book club chat, the benefit of it is you can ask your questions. So if you go down to the bottom of the Zoom window and you hit the Q&A button or the chat, I will get to your questions towards the end of our recording. So if you have any questions about crime or thriller writing or even poetry, because Tríona is multi-talented for our lovely guest, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A. But I'm going to go ahead and get started, okay? If that's all right with you. All right. Um, in a dark, dark wood, Ruth Ware writes, "It's always strange meeting another writer. A little feeling of camaraderie. I wonder if plumbers feel like this when meeting other plumbers, or if accountants give each other secret nods. Maybe it's because we meet comparatively rarely. Writers tend to spend the bulk of their working life alone." Well, in that passage, I completely related to it because I definitely got a feeling of camaraderie from some of my earliest conversations via chat with Comp Title Book Club's first guest ever, Tríona Walsh. Um,
Absolutely.
yes, the feeling is mutual. Can I tell our listeners a little bit about you before we dive on in?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So Tríona Walsh is an Irish writer with a passion for creating atmospheric and twisty crime novels. She lives in Dublin, Ireland, with her family, which consists of 4 kids, 3 cats, and just the one husband. She is the author of 2 novels, The Snowstorm and The Party, both published by Bookouture in 2023, and she was a joint winner of the Irish Writers' Centre Novel Fair competition in 2015 and again in 2021. She's also won the Molly Keane Short Story Competition and the Jonathan Swift Short Story Competition. In addition to prose, she has performed her own poetry with the Poetry Divas at festivals and events all around Ireland. Her poetry has appeared in print and has also been shortlisted for a number of competitions. So, as you can see, she loves to write, whatever form it takes. Tríona, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Delighted to be here.
Oh, I'm delighted to have you here. I One of the reasons that I first reached out to Tríona via Messenger, as I said before, is that I bought the Snowstorm based on the jacket copy. I was like, this sounds like a fantastic bottle episode of a novel. And I in my day job, I have freelance edited for different thriller writers of different levels, and I was like, I'm gonna figure out who's done it. And you kept me guessing till the end. I was like, this is a master class in plotting.
Uh,
Maybe we can talk about that a bit in a little while.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just thank you. I mean, for me as a crime writer, that is the biggest compliment to keep you guessing because that's what you want. You know, there's just so many crime stories out there. Are so many, and there's only so many stories. So to try and keep people guessing, that's for me is also what I love the most when I read crime. So I love hearing that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Not to get super crafty right off the top, but do you think that that comes from an interplay of like working with the tenets of the genre that people know and then finding like one or two twisty things you can do with things that people are expecting from crime and thriller writing?
Yeah, yeah, I think you have to do that. At this point, it's sort of it's kind of just become this feeds itself, and and you have to kind of play on what people know, what people are expecting, subvert that, and like, yeah, and tie your brain in knots. But and I think, yeah, I think you're not. There's no uh get out of jail free card with crime these days. You just have to work it. You have to get that right because if you don't, it doesn't matter how lovely, how good the rest of it is. It's a cop out if you haven't got the twist, the mystery, the whodunit bit as good as possible.
Feeds itself. It's the Ouroboros of genre writing. I love that. Well, so we're going to discuss. I mean, Tríona has written 2 fantastic books, which you should definitely check out: the Snowstorm and the Party, and I'm sure more are forthcoming. But what we're going to discuss today, this podcast and this monthly book club are called the Comp Title Book Club because we discuss titles that have inspired the writers we have on here. And today we're going to be discussing a book that we read over the course of this past month, In a Dark, Dark Wood, for our YouTube viewers. Oh, sun flare. Okay, that's the American cover. We're going to be discussing In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware, which was published here in the States by Simon & Schuster's Scout Press imprint in 2015, and I believe probably a little earlier in the year by Penguin UK's Harville Secker imprint. In the novel, the jacket copy describes it as what should be a cozy and fun-filled weekend deep in the English countryside takes a sinister turn. So, Tríona, could you tell me a little bit at the top here about what drew you to In a Dark, Dark Wood and prompted you to use it as a comparative title?
Sure. I have to say, I was trying to remember now when I was thinking about this, how I came across it. I have absolutely no memory. I don't know. Hadn't heard it, wasn't recommendation. I have literally no idea how I stumbled across it. And I listened to it on Audible first. And then I loved it so much, went out and got myself a hard copy of it. So it's really strange. I have no idea why I picked it up. But what drew me to it, I just immediately, I like Ruth Ware's writing, I think, and she does what I like to do is sort of trying it just, write nicely as well as doing all the fun genre stuff so that you're enjoying your read as well, as, as the fun of the thriller and the twist and the scared and the working it out and all that you get with the thriller. But what else drew it to me? I think it was just, what I was writing and, but specifically the comp title, it's in the kind of subgenre that I'm doing, that locked room, isolated location, and I just thought it did it really well because it's really hard because getting a gang of people, isolating them, and like we all know what's happening, we all know why they're going there, we all know the phone's not going to work, but it's making that credible, and I think she does that really well. So and that's so and the atmosphere is good. I love the way she creates the atmosphere. I like the credibility of the reduced number of people, and so that way I think would be particularly why I thought this was just a really good example of that.
Oh,
Am I
fantastic.
answering?
Fantastic. Yes, I can see as I read this, having already read your novels, definitely the similarity of as I called it, a bottle episode. That's what you would call it in television. But also just the locked room sort of aspect of it certainly happens in your novels and certainly happens in A Dark, Dark Wood. It's really fun to see people's personalities where oh, maybe someone's a little bit over the top and you think you could handle them in small doses, but then you're stuck with them,
Yeah,
snowbound somewhere, and all of a sudden it's going to be a whole different barrel of
yeah.
monkey.
Yeah.
Um, what are some of your favorite things about it that inspired you as you wrote your works? You spoke about this a little bit, but I guess this follow-up question, I mean, from a writing perspective, was there anything that as you were writing your debut novel, if you were struggling with a particular scene or chapter, was there a certain element of Ruth Ware's novel that you went back to and said, okay, how did she do this? I know I've done this one from time to time. I'm not sure if other writers also do this. I was just curious.
Oh no, I have to say I do that a lot. I have to say I would go back and I will take pictures with my phone of passages in books to just go back and say how they're doing that. I think with this book in particular, it might not have been specific small things, and I also don't know how successfully I did this either. But I loved the tension she created. I mean, I was anxious from practically the opening pages of this book. And again, that's what you really want to do with your book. So, I'd be looking at that again. I'd come back to this book with any new plotting, any new book I'm doing, looking, how did she make me feel so uncomfortable and like really just kind of, I'm certain, please just put me out of my agony here with this,
Yeah.
And I thought that was great. So I think that would be the big thing. I thought she just did that just brilliantly. And like, it's very interesting. So as I said, I listened to this on Audible initially, and I was enjoying it so much I left it on when my daughter came into the room. And normally I would just put off whatever, but after a couple of minutes, she was immediately, "What is this? What is?" And she went off and listened to it. So I think even just in the snippets she got, she felt that tension, and she was immediately drawn into it. So I think that's something. I just think she does brilliantly, and something I'm very interested from the crafty point of view. Again, not sure how successfully I did it. Hopefully, reasonably well with the snowstorm and the party, but definitely that would be the big thing I would say for me.
Mhm. Mm. And there was something you said a moment ago about just her having this rich language, these beautiful sentences in among the tenets of the genre. I think there's something, we'll get into it, but there's something about that formula of just like a sentence that is a gut punch and these short, sharp little chapters with false cliffhangers that keep you
Yeah,
turning pages that,
yeah.
yeah. Like I say, we'll get into craftier and potentially like, constructively critical questions later. But first, let's give a non-spoilery synopsis of the novel to those who might be tuning in, who are tuning in because they're Trina Walsh fans and they haven't yet read In a Dark, Dark Wood. Oh, they're out there. Don't you worry. Okay, so In a Dark, Dark Wood. All right. We open with an as yet unnamed first person narrator who's running through the woods towards oncoming traffic at night. And her only thought before she is picked up by a car is about someone named James. After the opening scene, this same woman, where we realize that the first person narrator is a woman, wakes up in hospital. Her name is Leonora Shaw, or Nora for short. We're told she has head damage and she wonders privately what she's done, implying that she's guilty of something related to the opening. We won't learn what that is yet. That's kind of the crux of the novel, because first we're going to flash back into the recent past, where we get some more background details about Nora. She's a 26-year-old crime novelist who is able to afford a studio flat in London due to her literary success and some family money. She lives a solitary existence, but this seems to be fine with her. She's been vulnerable at some point in the past, and it's hinted at that it didn't end well for her. While she's checking her email, she finds that she's been invited to a hen weekend, what we, my fellow countrymen in the United States, would call a bachelorette weekend, in a remote house up north for her estranged childhood best friend, Claire. It's really strange to Nora that Claire has invited her because they haven't been in each other's lives for years and years, and it seems like their relationship didn't end on the best terms. Case in point, she wasn't even invited to the wedding, and she doesn't know whom Claire is marrying.
Oh, I have to say now that that's a good setup of the or good description setup. I love that, to be honest with you. I thought that just that minute she sits there and she's reading the email and she's invited to this hen from this somebody she hasn't seen in 10 years, and I was maybe all us writers are introverts and the thought even going to these things, even somebody we know, is horrible. But I was immediately tense. I was immediately, don't go, don't, Nora, don't go to this. This is bad. Don't go. So I thought that was, really, I really enjoyed uh, that setup, because you're wrong-footed. You know it's not. There's not nothing good is going to come from this, and it's just like behind you. It's just like
Yeah.
don't go. So anyway, continue.
No, that's a really good setup. You're absolutely right. And even if you aren't necessarily the most introverted person in the world, a Hindu, once you've been to one, you've kind of been to all of them.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
even if it's your best friend in the entire world, there's sort of a, I've got to go to this thing. And
yes.
so for me as a writer, I was like, oh gosh, she's really got to help us suspend our disbelief that this woman who has fallen out of contact with her best friend Claire is even going to fathom going.
Yeah.
And I'll get into why she does just here in a bit. But I was like, okay, like you've really got to sell me on the fact that she's going to go to the middle of nowhere with people she's barely seen, barely knows anymore,
Mm.
for a miserable social engagement. But she is guilted into attending the weekend by Claire's maid of honor, Flo, and by Nina, a shared friend from home who has become a doctor in the intervening decades since she last saw her. There are hints, such as the fact that Nora is nervous to see her old best friend Claire again, and by the fact that she used to go by the nickname Lee instead. That in moving to London, in starting her life over again, in being so introverted, she's run from something up north. She's originally from Reading, and from something in her past. Okay, so together with Nina, Nora travels north for the party weekend. And once they arrive, we meet other members of the hen party. There are three others. We have Flo, the maid of honor, we have Melanie, and we have Tom.
Yeah.
Did you have anything?
Yeah, no, they're a great gang. I think this is something as well. It's interesting our reaction to you're looking for a reason why she would go to this stranger, and maybe I'm just really bad at saying no to things, and I'd be going, yeah, okay, of course I'll go. And there's all these strangers I don't know, and but there's something, So she goes to the ten party and meets all these characters, and I have to say, there's another reason I hadn't mentioned this before, but another reason why I quite like this book is because I thought the characters were quite strong, and I think again with a thriller book it's getting that twist and that reveal and the mystery right can be hard because again there's no new ideas, but one thing you really do is make memorable characters. And like I love Flo in particular. Flo, yes, you could argue she's a bit over the top and she's obviously a woman who's on the edge, but I just really enjoyed, I reckon the writer Ruth Ware really enjoyed writing Flo. So when I came back, when you asked me what book and I mentioned this, there was two things I, before I went back and reminded of, two things I really remembered about this. It was the characters, and the twist. Just, and I think that's a real sign of a good book. There's great characters, Flo and the friend Nina as well. I think she's great as well. So, but Flo, read this book just for Flo.
Oh, yes. And to paint a brief picture of Flo, she is intense. She is
yes,
intense. That would be a polite way of describing Flo.
yeah,
Um, she wants to make this the best Hindu for Claire that she possibly can. She
that's right.
idolizes the ground that this woman walks on. She tries to dress like her, even though they have different body types.
Mm,
And I love an ensemble cast as well. And I'm just thinking I have some questions about the zeitgeist in which this novel was written and came out. But I also can't help but think of a film that came out a few years before this, Bridesmaids, where you similarly have a coterie of very different women that are involved
mm,
in a bridal party. And Flo is like, she's certainly not Rose Byrne's character in Bridesmaids, who's making everything perfect for Maya
yes,
Rudolph's character, but she's like Rose Byrne's character if she was like 5 degrees off normal, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
So okay, we meet Flo, Melanie, and Tom. And as I said, Flo has this scary intensity about making this the best hen weekend ever. And meanwhile, Melanie intimates to the others that Flo dropped out of university after having a breakdown in her third year. So we're clearly setting up Flo as like, okay, this is someone to watch out for.
Mm,
The house where they're hosting the hen party is a bit creepy. It's out in the woods in it's all minimalist concrete and exposed glass, which this was speaking of lovely writing. I thought that the observation that Nora feels like they're on a stage was brilliant. I think we've all been in a home that's unfamiliar to us that has that kind of exposure where you're like, okay, who can see in, all that sort of thing. It also has zero cellular mobile phone device reception.
of course.
Yeah, because that's a big problem. I have to imagine for thriller writers, that's a huge problem in this day and age. If people have cell reception, half your problems are solved. You can call for a
Absolutely.
car. You
Yeah.
can,
It
yeah.
has ruined, it has become the biggest challenge of, I think we're all just going to have to write books in the 80s and not go on
Yes.
beyond them. It's the only solution. Yeah, so it's huge issue.
As a child of the 80s, I am perfectly fine with this.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Um, so it has no cell reception, though there is a landline. The home belongs to Flo's aunt, and there's a shotgun hanging over the mantle of the fireplace, which is allegedly used for warning rabbits off the garden in the summer.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I have to say, like when I read that, I think if you know a little bit about, writing, it's the whole Chekhov,
Yes.
gun. If it's there's a gun in scene one, it will be used by scene three or whatever. So I smiled when I read that. I was like, But I also kind of like that. Even if you're unfamiliar with those, you're still going to go. Has it gone? Like, that's going to give you a bad feeling. So I thought that was a nice little nod for those in the know, but also it worked quite well for those, maybe, less in the know.
Yes, and Ruth Ware does a good job of towing that line, right? Because, in my notes as I was reading, I said, "Oh, it's Chekhov's gun. Like it's going to go off at some point in this novel." And then Tom, who works in the theater in the West End, about 10 pages later says,
Yeah,
"Oh, Chekhov's gun," and everyone's like, "What?" And he explains it to the
yeah,
characters.
yeah.
So okay, we've met everyone. We've gone into the house. We flash forward. as we will a few times in the novel, to the hospital, where Nora is awake and alert and assessing the damage to her person. She has these flashes of memory, vague memory of walking over glass, blood pooling on a bleached wood floor, and not much else. She has a bruise on her shoulder, which she realizes, big, flashing, potential red herring, no spoilers, is
Yeah.
recoil from a shotgun. So that's Chekhov's gun dispensed with. She keeps wondering, what have I done? Back at the Hindu, Nora's feeling cooped up inside the house, so she goes for a jog through the woods and on the road. She's upset at Claire for inviting her. Why has she brought her out here? And then at the end of that particular chapter, we have a false cliffhanger in which she runs into Claire, who's coming up the drive, and Claire wonders what she's doing there. I call this a false cliffhanger because the very next chapter, the very first paragraphs, dispense with it. Claire amends her question to go, obviously, I know you were invited to the Hindu. What are you doing out on the road?
Yeah, I love that bit because this is it. Up to that point, I mean, what chapter were we at that point? We're
Like
quite a good,
six or
yeah,
seven.
we're a good way in. And I was just getting more tense and more tense and more tense, just waiting. Can Claire please just show up? Can we just, so for her to show up and the first line, I mean, I know I was being emotionally manipulated, I was aware of that, but just for her to kind of go, what are you doing here? It's just like, oh God, is this really as awful as it feels,
Yes.
So, and so it was a bit of a cheat because immediately, as you say, the next chapter, she's going, no, I mean, why are you out here, not at the house, and you're like, okay. But I loved it. It really worked for me. I was wonderfully
Oh, yeah.
manipulated. I thought it was great.
Yes, because I sat up and I think, she was leaning into that. We're like, okay, Claire hasn't shown up yet. Claire
Yeah,
potentially may not be coming to this. This could
yeah,
be some weird false pretense to lure her out into the wood. Yeah. So Claire and Nora ride up to the house together. It's an awkward drive. And you can tell that even as friends, they were a bit mismatched as a
yes,
pair.
definitely.
Yes. Nora asks just flat out, why have I been invited? And Claire says, I thought it would be better if you learned in person who I'm marrying. I'm marrying James. And we learn who James is to Nora. He was her high school boyfriend, pretty much the only man she's ever been in love with from 10 years ago, and she's completely not over him yet. So, on this intensely awkward, uncomfortable note, the party gets underway with some champagne, some tequila, and even for Claire, Nora, Tom, and Nina, some illicit substances. They do some lines of coke. Nina gets into an argument with Flo because their personalities are a bit uh, at odds. Flo is very earnest and intense, and Nina is highly sarcastic. And Flo cracks a plate in her anger, more of like, look at her, she's unstable. Um, During a game of Never Have I Ever, Nina further stirs the pot about James by saying, and pardon me, a little bit of language here, by saying, Never have I ever fucked James Cooper, thereby putting Nora and Claire in another awkward position. Nora especially takes it hard. Did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I thought this was a great example because, and what I found when I was reading this book, I found it very unsettling that Nina, who's Nora's friend in this and her ally, that occasionally she, as you say, she stirs the pot a bit. Like she doesn't keep, when she could just like be her ally and make the whole experience a lot more comfortable for her. She can't help but, just niggle and just like, poke in there and just like, make it work. And it made me so uncomfortable because I couldn't even relax into the fact that Nina was there for Nora, at any point if they were really stressed. I thought it was great. It was because once that initial tension is over, that Claire is there and so that initial bit is over, she needs to keep the tension up. And then just little things like that we're never like fully relaxed or never comfortable. And then Nina's a great character as well. As you say, she's sarcastic, she's in your face, but you can't rely on her. And, so I thought I really liked that. And so again, it's a great book, giving you little insights to characters and how they can really elevate, for me anyway, a thriller to, a next level. So,
Yes, and given that, Nora doesn't really feel that as an adult she can really rely on either of these friends, it makes her so much more vulnerable, I
yeah,
think.
absolutely.
So, if you are at all familiar with the rules of the game Never Have I Ever, if you're playing it as a drinking game, if you have done the thing, you have to take a shot. So, the shot that Nora has to take, because she is one of the two people at the party who have slept with James, pushes her over the edge, and she goes upstairs to get sick, and then she decides to call it a night. The others beg her not to, especially Flo, who says she's ruined everything.
Of
But
course.
she's like, yeah, of course. She's like, you're on my list now, kid. Uh, but Nora's like, forget it, I'm going to bed. Later, Nina tries to get the truth of why and how she and James broke up 10 years ago out of Nora, but Nora vehemently denies her theories. Nina's like, did he hit you? Did he give you an STD? And Nora vehemently denies her theories that he was physically abusive or sleeping around. All she will say is that he broke up with her via text, and the text basically told her not to contact him again. We still don't have the full story, but it's clear the emotional whiplash is enough that it still has her unsettled a decade later. Oh, and speaking of that gorgeous writing you're talking about, there was a great line in the context of Never Have I Ever that I wanted to read. Ruth Ware writes, in Nora's perspective, I'd spent the last round trying to grope my way past the fog of tequila and champagne and rum and think of what to say, but every memory seemed to bring me back to James. I thought of all the things I'd never done, never said. And I'm getting chills just reading that. It's really good use of a set piece to really move forward character development. Nora wakes up the next morning, so it's a hen weekend. They're there from Friday until they're supposed to be there until Sunday afternoon. She wakes up on Saturday morning to see that it snowed in the night. She goes for a run and greets Melanie in the kitchen upon her return. She asks her about some footprints she saw going to the garage of the house, which seem a little suspicious, but hey, maybe one of them walked out there in the night. Melanie, who I should point out has a 6-month-old infant at home, doesn't really know much about the footprints, but she is distraught to learn that the snow has knocked out the landline. There's no way of calling out, and she decides to leave the party early. I have to say, speaking of ensemble casts, one thing I think we can risk as writers is having too many characters. If we're talking about stirring the pot, this is too many cooks in the kitchen. Um, I don't know. What did you think? I felt like Tom and Melanie could have been combined into one character. I just didn't get the point of Melanie
Yeah.
beyond being a plot point here, as I'm about to get into.
Yeah, I agree. Like Melanie, there was no point to Melanie. She like if Ruth Ware had gone back and deleted every bit of Melanie from the previous book, there would have made no difference to the read. So it was one big criticism I would have had at this point when reading it myself. I was like, why Melanie? Like, I was, and I'm happy also to kind of, because in some ways it suggests this is a spoiler because you have people coming to read this, and when Melanie disappears, like when I read it and Melanie goes home, I was kind of waiting for Melanie to come back and do something. So I'm happy to spoil that for anybody who's coming to this. Go, no, Melanie's gone. She was pointless. She did nothing. So I presume that when Ruth Ware was writing this, she was kind of going, well, I can't just have three people at this hen. That's not believable. So she, fleshed it out with Melanie. And I think I would have done that too in her position. But I think she might have should have worked harder to get Melanie to have a point, because no, she's yeah, I agree with you. Pointless.
Right, because to me, it's like her one narrative purpose is to leave at that point because it creates a social obligation for Nina and Nora to
Yeah,
stay. But I do think she's already done a good enough job of showing, hey, Flo's really intense. Flo potentially might hunt down our car if we leave and go to the train station. So I don't think necessarily that we needed Melanie there just to
no.
say, hey, one person has left, so now you have to stay.
Yeah.
Um, there's a flashback at this point to Nora's childhood, and we learn how she and Claire first met I believe, in kindergarten. It seems that 6-year-old Claire, quote, chose Nora and gave her entree to a great many parts of social life that otherwise the wallflower Nora would have not had access to. But it also seems to me that Claire was sometimes a total manipulative jerk throughout their friendship. Um, Back at the Hindu, when Melanie leaves, Flo is, of course, in hysterics. Nina suggests that she and Nora could leave too, but Nora is worried about how it'll look after Melanie's left, so they agree to stay. Hey, it's just one more night. We'll be gone by 2 p.m. on Sunday. We flash forward to the hospital where the night nurse confirms to Nora that she was in a car accident. When the nurse leaves the room, Nora realizes that there's a policewoman posted outside her door, and she overhears the policewoman and the night nurse talking. The detective constable mentions it's a homicide investigation, which means that, as the night nurse calls it, the poor love didn't make it. And Nora wonders whom she means by this. At the next point, then later on Saturday, the remainder of the hen party go to a shooting range where, sorry, I'm laughing because this was a bit of a bizarre moment for me, where a man named Greg, pronounced Grieg because he's Australian, inexplicably so, and he looks like Tom Cruise, advises them on best practices when shooting. Um, for me, the shooting range, again, narrative sort of thing. It seemed to clearly exist just to show the reader how screwed up someone can be from the effects of like a point blank rifle shooting injury.
Yeah.
Um, and I know you have some opinions on this, Trina, but in my part of the world, which is the American South, where
Yeah.
like bachelorette parties will hop on one of those petty cabs and just like go day drinking and it bleeds into night drinking. I was like, what kind of hen party goes to a shooting range? This
Well,
is
this maybe is a slight cultural thing. Now, it's still, to be honest with you, hen parties, you go somewhere, you drink a lot, and that's your weekend. But there is a bit of a trend for just kind of being taken to an outdoor adventure center, and kind of having to do an assault course, and kind of like fun, fun activities, which nobody wants to do. So while yes, this is a very useful, fun activity, with the whole gun thing. For me, it didn't stand out. I went like, yeah, I could see being dragged to something stupid like that. So cultural, we'll call it a cultural difference.
I'm laughing for two reasons. First off, just the fact that that's true, and you said like a fun activity, like
Yeah.
organized fun. I think also Flo mentions, and I was like, oh, poor sweet Flo does not have very many female friends, because she goes, my cousin took his stag party here, and I'm like, yeah, because it's a dude activity, like it's something men
Yeah.
would do together. But
Yeah.
I'm
That's
also
funny.
laughing because when I think about the organized fun I've been subjected to at bachelorette weekends, I think the worst one was a pole dancing class.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was fun, but now I'm just picturing like Flo, Melanie, Tom, all of those chaps doing this. Oh
Yes.
my gosh. So I think they're driving back from the shooting range. And Tom asks Nora about her and James. You know, he knows about them because of the Never Have I Ever game. How did they get together in school? And she tells some story about them being the leads in Tennessee Williams's Cat on a Hot Tin Roof together. And she was only the female lead because Claire, who was the assumed favorite to be this role, got glandular fever and was out for the entire term. And so Nora was her understudy, spent a lot of time around James, and they got together that way. Um, Back to the mention of the footprints in the snow, Flo explains that the locals in the area don't like her aunt's super modern house that kind of took over a crofter's hall or something like that. And in fact, it was burned down mid build originally. And there's some speculation that that might have been an arson attempt. So they all worry that that might be the source of the footprints in the snow outside the house, that some lurker is out there. To spook things up more and probably really unsettled Trina, they decide to play a game of a Ouija board, but rather than if people are picturing like the Parker Mattel board that comes with the planchette and you just kind of move it over, what they have is a biro or a ballpoint pen Ouija board where you stick the pin in a slot in the planchette and you move it together and you do automatic writing. So instead of going over and spelling out words, they're writing out words together as a group. And Flo nearly loses her shit at the way that some of the others, especially Nina and Tom, are making a joke out of it. Um, Nora thinks that she's being called out when the quote unquote spirits call someone in the group a murderer, though it's not yet clear why. That will, no spoilers, come to light later on. Um, that night, around 2 a.m., they've all gone to bed, but they're woken when they realize that a door has been left unlocked, one outside of the kitchen, and that there are footprints leading away from the house. To make matters worse, Nora's phone is missing. Nora in hospital recollects that they were woken again later that night, maybe an hour or so later. And when they're woken later, someone is on the stairs, an intruder, and Flo shoots them. Okay, I'm going to stop there to avoid any spoilers. Dun dun dun. That's like the big climax of the novel. I really recommend anyone listening to this podcast go out and pick up your own copy of In a Dark Dark Wood. My assessment is that overall I liked it. I would probably, if I were on Goodreads, I would be giving it 4 stars out of 5. I did have a few hangups when it came to things like, hey, I think that these characters could be consolidated. There were 1 or 2 chapters where I was like, we've got to introduce every single person in this hen party. I don't know why I have to know that Tom has a heart tattoo on his left shoulder or whatever. But overall, it was a delightful, engaging, well paced read. Um, and speaking of it being well paced, I'd like to say and observe that I feel this novel has surprisingly quick chapters. There are these flashes to the woods, to the hospital, to the hen party, back and back. I don't think any chapter was more than maybe 10 pages long. And they really grip us up in this momentum quickly. And I think that Ruth Ware has a really good instinct also for cliffhangers. We mentioned while we were doing the partial synopsis, chapters 6 and 7 have really good ones. That's when Nora runs into Claire in the road on the way to the house, and the big reveal that Claire is marrying James. But I wondered, in light of all of that, Tríona, do you feel that there's a pressure on us as writers today? And by today, I mean since Web 3.0 became a thing, since social media became a thing, that we're encouraged to write for readers with shorter and shorter attention spans. Because I feel like some things play into this, into my question. There's the advent of Kindle Unlimited. Let me try that again. The advent of Kindle Unlimited's payment structure, where you're paid for how many pages a reader reads. So if they do not finish, you don't get compensated. And then short form media like TikTok, which everyone always talks about. Oh, the kids don't have an attention span anymore. Do you feel like that has impacted the way that we're encouraged to write? Usually this is working in a dark, dark wood, but for instance, chapter 14 is another hospital flash forward, which is short to the point that the only thing we learn is that Nora knows she has to figure out who did what. And I get it from a reader perspective why it has to happen, but at the same time I was like, I don't need chapter 14. What do you,
Yeah.
sorry, I just asked you like 5 questions at once.
No, it's okay. If I go off track, you just pull me back in.
No, go on
Um,
tangents. I'm here for it.
yeah, no, definitely. I think so. Um, I think there's definitely a readers are their attention span is just a lot shorter. I know. I mean, I definitely it was a theme in some people who really enjoyed my book. A few of them kind of said, "Oh, it's a bit slow to get going." And if you read my book, I would have like I looked at it going, "What?" So we've got dead bodies all over the place within a few chapters. But definitely, I think they're no. I mean, structurally, if I'm so when I'm writing crime thriller, like if you want to do a very pacey scene, you shorten your sentences. You know, if you just want to kind of, so it kind of goes to figure that if you want to also keep the pace, you shorten your chapters. And I know I do that myself. There would be in the snowstorm and then in the party, especially at the end of the party when it's reaching crescendo. I have a few chapters which are just very short, like they might be 2 pages, like just to kind of get that tension, to help aid that tension, and I think that's okay. But there's definitely a trend towards um not trusting the reader to stick with something. I mean, it's interesting. I looked at one of my previous books, which I wrote. Now, you mentioned the opening that I'd been a finalist in the Irish Writers' Centre Novel Fair. So this one of these books, so I was looking at this book of mine that had been a finalist. So to be a finalist, now this isn't me blowing my own trumpet, just but to be a finalist in that, you have to beat a huge competition and would have been picked to be one of the best unpublished crime books at the time. So I took that out for a different reason. I was looking at it. So I opened the first and read the first chapter myself. And I was going, oh my God, this is so slow. This is terrible. So even myself, in the sort of like maybe 5 or 6 years since I wrote that book, I have been conditioned. Whereas I thought that was great. I thought it was a great opening, and it was as I'd chosen for a big competition. So, but even that time, I would not write that book like that. Now, I would cut like sort of like about 8,000 words from the start of that. So that's a long way from me going, yes, I agree with you. I think attention spans, things like Kindle Unlimited, that If you can just drop it and step away, if it's not immediately pulling them in, I think that is a problem, and I think it shouldn't be. It's a shame. But, we should trust the reader, and the reader should,
To
trust the
trust
book.
us. Yeah, like,
Yeah,
"Don't worry, there's some things I've gotta lay out, but it's gonna
it's
get going, and when it does."
worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah. But I take your meaning, and another thing that, I'm always I'm such a, like, utilitarian when it comes to narrative structure. I'm like, "What is this serving? Is it moving the plot forward? Is it moving the character forward? Cut it if it's not." But I think you're right, like, maybe there is something to be said for, like, a little vibe check of a chapter that's 2 pages long that just really gets us into, like, "Oh my god, what's going to happen next?" Maybe that's a reader service, and maybe that should also be seen as having a narrative purpose in this day and age when it's so interactive. I also One thing I love, and I think that you and Ruth Ware have a good instinct for this, is you can trick the reader almost into feeling that there's momentum if people are doing some sort of activity as
Yeah,
they're and this book starts out of the gate with someone running. It's almost like having a walk and talk and like an
yeah,
Aaron Sorkin drama. There's a
yeah,
sense that something is happening, even if we're
yeah.
just having a chat over a bill that's trying to pass in Congress. Um,
That's a really good
yeah,
point. That's an excellent example. Yeah,
yeah.
I like that.
I feel like he pioneered it. So, um, as we talked about during the synopsis, the house as a stage and the characters as performers is a really fascinating um, mental picture to paint. And you have something of a locked room with the snowstorm. I have to apologize. I have not had time this summer yet to read The Party, but it is definitely on my to be read list.
Ah, thank you. Sure.
Um, do you feel that focusing a thriller on 1 or 2 locations increase its sense of claustrophobia? And are there any potential drawbacks to limiting yourself to one location or one narrative point of view?
Mm. Yeah, well, I think yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nose or the nail on the head, whatever cliche I was reaching for there. I think the one location, yeah, the claustrophobia. Like, if you can't, somewhere you can't really leave, you can't get out of, and there's very limited space to go to, whether you're stuck in a house or like in the snowstorm, it's set on an island that's cut off because there's a storm. And just the uncomfortableness that brings to any narrative. I think immediately the reader yeah, understands where you're coming from. Um, what are the drawbacks? Yeah, the problem is that you have to be careful that it could get boring. Like, oh, we're stuck in this house again. Oh, what are we going to do? And I think a lot of one with in the Dark Dark Wood, where Ruth does the flashback with the house, whatever, is because she needs kind of do that. Otherwise, the pace you lose the pace entirely.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly why it's structured like that. So that is the drawback, to make sure that uh, that while it is stuck, you see all the narrative, dramatic benefit of just a one claustrophobic location without, like, overdoing it, without losing any of the
Mm.
pace.
That's so smart. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. It's like by flashing away, it's a breath of fresh air. I was thinking as you were saying that all the set pieces, the games that they play that you would do at a hen party, giving some interest. But yes, that's so smart. That having a secondary location where you can flash to kind of lets the reader have a layback from the tension, before we get back to it again. Um, this is something I feel like I have to break this question down a little bit for American listeners who may not be as familiar with this. But it's very interesting to me as an Anglophile that she has to go back north to the north of England for this hen party, not just because she's going back to where her childhood and traumas from her past are, but just like different regions in the US have their own stereotypes and cliches. I mean, I mentioned being in the American South, and I mean, that's a huge region, but I mean, you see that being used in horror, everything from like voodoo in New Orleans to like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. There's this sense of almost like dread that she's leaning into with the north of England, which tends to be more rural, rural, but also industrial. Like it has a bunch of the industrial areas of the country, and I thought it was interesting that there was this sense of the north being used as a mood as the locals don't like all this modernity that we're bringing in with this home, which Nora doesn't like it either. So that's interesting. I wondered, because then you take this and do it so well with an Irish flair to it, with the remote Irish island where the snowstorm is set. What was it like reading this sort of North versus South for you as an Irish reader and writer?
And, that's a really interesting question because I hadn't totally picked up on that myself when I read it, because I think when you come from somewhere like Ireland, where it's not the center of uh, where books are written, so books are written in the UK. If you're reading in the English language, it's going to be set in the UK. It's going to be set in the US, and you get used. Like I'm at the moment, I'm reading a really good thriller called The Chain. It's set. I don't even know where it's set. They've mentioned New York. They've mentioned Boston. I don't really know. It's interesting, but it's just kind of generic US as far as I'm concerned,
Like a
Um,
studio backlot or something,
yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah. Sorry. And so that's kind of, when I read the UK, it nearly washes over me a little. Yeah, this is another one in the UK. But I think I know it's terrible, but you're so used to it,
Yeah.
and that is kind of slightly tangentially. That is why my books are very much there, set in Ireland, and they're very distinctive flavour. Because it's just nice to see that representation. I know it's a bit silly, but
Yes. Yes.
um, but that said, I really like your take on, and again that went over my head entirely. But I think you're absolutely spot on, because the north of England, that dynamic, the north of England is much poorer than the south of England. South of England is, when you think of the more sort of, no, I don't insult an entire nation, but like that more brash kind of rich posh. Some of the English kind of traits that you might get you a bit annoyed. They're not northern, what I mean. It's all those rich people down the south of England type of thing. um, and which, as I said, I'd like to point out to all the lovely English people who might tune into this gross generalization.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely north, industrial, rural, poor, so that definitely, I think what you were talking about there, that is definitely a part of the theme. And that's actually very good, and I'm going to reread it again with that in mind.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad I've led you to like some food for thought. Yeah, I would honestly be curious. I didn't see it in her author bio if Ruth Ware is originally from the North. Because like I know with my novels, especially with My Big Fake Wedding, I was living in New York when I got the idea for it. And almost immediately upon getting the idea for it, I was like, I am not setting this in New York. Because
Yeah,
when you set something in New York, it's a city with a personality, just
yeah.
like London is, just like Los Angeles is. I don't want to have to make it its own character. And so I wonder if she was similarly saying, like, I
Mm.
want this to be about an area I'm familiar with so I can really hit those
Yeah.
nuances.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that, because like I've read your books, and your locations are definitely real character. And they stood out. Actually, it wasn't generic US, So and they
That's,
definitely added, and I liked it.
oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, it was a real. I think that was that's I noticed that without noticing it. I just
It's
enjoyed it.
it's interesting to hear you say that because since that was what I didn't want to happen, I wonder if more it was me bucking up against like I don't want to have to play with the expectations of what everyone sees as like their New York or
Yeah.
and then meanwhile I was like, okay, not that many novels have been written about Richmond, Virginia or Jacksonville, Florida. Like I can really
I
illuminate the parts that I enjoy about my hometowns.
I suppose maybe what I mean more, it's less that it's just another New York. It's more, it was very natural. It
Oh,
was very
thank you.
comfortable. You obviously knew where this location was. And you brought it to life, but in a non-obtrusive
Thank
fashion.
you.
And I wasn't kind of, like I said, with the book I'm reading now, I'm really enjoying it, but I have no idea where it's meant to be.
New
And
York, Boston,
yeah,
anyone's
yeah.
anyone's guess.
Whereas when I read, your books, I had a good sense of where it was without it, kind of like taking over. So yeah, so
Oh,
I think,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you so much. Yeah, I get the same. Like there were, and sorry, I feel like as even as I said it, I was like Irish flair. That's not how I want to state what I felt when I read The Snowstorm, because that I feel like starts to make it sound like stereotype. But there
yeah,
is like an Irishness to The Snowstorm that I think informs these characters, informs their social dynamics, how they interact with their town. that's just really interesting to me. And also going, hey, we're not all Galway and we're not all Dublin.
Yeah,
It was really, I thought that was great.
thank you.
Um, yeah, you're very welcome. So it's really interesting to me because we've talked about the flashing back and forth. And without too terribly many spoilers, I'll try to be as spoiler free as possible. It seems to me that from approximately halfway through the novel, this book is told just from the hospital as Nora tries to solve the mystery of who has been shot, who shot them. And we talked about the claustrophobia of having it all in just one or two locations. And I wondered if this time structure of like, okay, well, we've been bopping back and forth. Now we're just going to be moving forward has any impact on the novel at all. And I was very aware. And then I was like, oh, of course, because I went back and I looked at her comp titles in the jacket copy, and it was exactly what I thought it would be. This is written in the heyday of Gone Girl, of Girl on the Train, as I called it, the girls on trains, planes, and automobiles, because it felt like every thriller title at that time was like, how can we make this sound like Paula Hawkins?
Yep.
Um, and so do you think, number one, how do you feel that this time structure of like from the back half moving forward, it's all just moving forward? How do you feel that that impacts the novel? And follow up question, do you think that the literary zeitgeist of 2014 and 2015 had something to do with this structural choice?
Yeah, no, very good questions. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel because um, I mean, I guess it might just be, I mean, with the fact that it's going forward, that at some point, it's just going to have to find a new momentum. We've had the momentum with why is she there? What's the mystery? And at some point it's just going to have to move forward. So whether it's just a sort of a practical, and interesting enough, like, I love this book altogether, that kind of that section between sort of like where we're looking back what happened and then the big denouement at the end. That was my least favorite section in the
Mhm.
middle, and I felt she doesn't remember things, and I felt that was a little contrived, and tying that into the girls on the trains planes not love that. I felt that was a clumsy kind of that unreliable narrator kind of vibe that ran through a lot of them. "Ooh, I can't remember what happened." I was just like, "Oh, come on,
Yeah.
it's okay. Give me two chapters where you can't remember, but don't base." So I've mixed feelings on that, but definitely, I think you're right. I think it's probably definitely influenced by the books at that time.
Yeah, and to your point about that being potentially your least favorite part of the novel, I remember reading Gone Girl, and when we start to get Amy's perspective, it slowed a little bit. Once we
Mhm.
got away from like, here's me explaining my side of things to like her going on. I vaguely recall there being a road trip, and I was like, I don't care about this. Like, let's get back to the
Yeah.
mystery of it all. Um, yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear you think about. And then, so let me see. Let me make sure in my notes I don't spoil anything with this question. Um, okay, I'm not spoiling anything aside from the fact that, like, if you know anything about this genre, it's pretty clear Flo is set up to be a red herring. She's unstable. She wants everything to be perfect. She cracks a plate in anger. Blah blah blah. Um, I have to ask, as a crime and thriller writer, did you see this ending coming? I was able to get rid of suspects, but I didn't narrow it down until it was right smack dab on top of me.
Yeah, no, I didn't really. I mean, like partly like because Flo is nearly so um unstable that I'm kind of going, could you be double bluffing us here?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think again, so she does a lot what I have to do. In that there's a very shallow pool of suspects.
Hmm.
So you really have to muddy everything. And to be honest with you, like about a few months after reading this, again, I was chatting to my daughter about it, and we both went, "What happens at the end again?" And we both of
Yes.
us were sort of, we weren't really sure. So I think, yeah, it's nearly overcomplicated and a bit over, but what I will say um, is that I think one of the reasons why I think I really like this novel is that in among the sort of kind of confusing, misdirects and the everything. The twist is hiding in plain sight the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's clever and but simple. And I just I don't talk it too much, but so I thought I didn't see that, and I said, and as a crime reader, because I just love crime, and as a crime writer, I always know who did it. I always know who did it. I always know why. I always see it all being set up, and again, it's ruined. Being writing this genre has kind of ruined it for me. So when I come across a book where I actually don't work it out, and when I don't work it out, because and it doesn't have to be perfect, because this wasn't a perfect ending, but when there's something particularly clever and smart in there, I love that, and I think that really is a huge part why I love this. And I thought it was good. I thought, now
Yeah.
maybe that's just me. Maybe somebody else will come along and go, duh.
No, well, first off, not about the like things that maybe didn't add up at the end or worse, but with muddying the waters with such a small cast, I thought that like you did that so well, but with the snowstorm, it's a group of what, five friends. One is passed away, and
Yeah,
they're all getting back together to commemorate the anniversary of his death.
yeah.
And so it's a very, you've got one who's the protagonist and then four potential suspects, and your protagonist is not as I think the genre has moved away from the girls on trains, planes, and automobiles who can't recall everything. Your
Mm.
protagonist is a pretty reliable narrator. Like, we don't suspect her of doing anything. So we've got four people who ostensibly could have done, or actually three people.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think
This
you do
fourth.
that. Oh,
I think
okay.
it was
What?
the fourth. Yeah, but still,
Yeah.
it's tiny. It's a small pool, very small.
Yeah, and I thought, I mean, you kept me guessing to the end as well, and I think that really stands out. So yeah, you clearly know what you're doing. And then
Oh,
meanwhile,
thank you so much.
you're very welcome. I really enjoyed it. And then what I wanted to say about we were kind of talking, we were going over notes before we had this conversation, and I love if you could share the Sir Alfred Hitchcock quote that you said, because I pointed out, most thrillers that I read, when you get to the end, there's like one or two things that just don't add up or aren't quite believable, but you don't care because the tension, the juicy tension, is what brought you to it. It's like
Exactly.
horror movies aren't scary once you see the whole monster, but that's not why you watch the horror
Yeah,
movie. You watch it
yeah,
for like the legend, the mythos at the beginning, and for all those like little jump scares that get you.
yeah. Absolutely, and yeah, and that quote, yeah. Listen, we were just chatting, and it came to mind. It was the one. Was it? There's no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. Uh,
Yes,
it's so
yes.
good, isn't it? And like I keep that in mind. Like I like when I'm writing, I try and keep that in mind as well. Like once it's out of the box, fine. It's all about like So yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't agree with you more.
Oh gosh, what's that in the box just made me think of the film Seven. Like,
No.
once we know it's Gwyneth Paltrow's head, who cares?
I've never been the same after that.
Let's see. I do have some more questions. By the way, anyone who's attending, again, I just want to mention, you can always listen to Comp Title Book Club on YouTube or whatever podcasting platform you subscribe to. But if you attend as one of the up to 100 live Zoom audience members, if you have a burning question for one of your favorite authors or one about your favorite genre, feel free to type it in the question and answer box or the chat, and we'll get to it. Um, I wanted to talk about the Hindu a little bit more. It made me chuckle to think about our two genres. I've been published thus far in my writing career as a rom-com novelist and women's fiction, and you have been published predominantly as a thriller writer. And I have this working theory that whether a novel is a rom-com or a thriller all depends on tone, because your novel, your debut novel, The Snowstorm, is about a group of friends stuck together in a snowstorm, and In a Dark, Dark Wood is similarly. But you could also argue so is The Big Chill, and so is my second novel, How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days. It's almost like the general advice with Shakespeare that his comedies almost always end in a wedding and his tragedies almost always end in a funeral. Do you, Trina, have any thoughts on how tone changes everything with a genre?
Oh, well, I just love this observation. I would never again put those two and two together, but it's so true. Like, it's just like put a body in, take a body out. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think, other than being thoroughly amused that after you're spot on, it's a great observation.
I think that's where if anyone follows me on Instagram, that's where rom-com best friend and thriller best friend came from. The idea that like the same situation you could be like, "Oh God, a guy has been coming to my coffee shop and he ordered my drink and he knew my order and he wrote his digits on my cup." It's so romantic. And then if you're in a thriller genre, you're like, "This guy's stalking me. He knows my order." Like, "Oh God."
They're particularly funny. Anyone who hasn't looked at them, you have to go and look at it. They're so funny because this is it. You've summed it up beautifully. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's I don't have a huge amount to add on that. I think you're a genius for thinking of that.
Oh
You know,
God,
because
thank you. Thank you
it's
so
so
much. I was not fishing for compliments when I asked this question. This is just
I know.
legitimately something I've been thinking about for a while now.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's
no, I need
brilliant.
to I need to get back to those girls. I need to figure out what they're
Right.
doing now. There's also again with the Hindu, there's also this interesting dynamic in a dark dark wood of when you're with people from a certain time in your life and how you almost regress back to who you were then because Nora as Nina and Claire keep slipping up and calling her Lee instead of Nora, both of which are short for Leonora. She starts to stammer again like she did when she was a child and she's in some ways acting a little infantile. And I feel that this comes into play in your first novel in some ways because of how they interacted. The group of friends who are getting back together are people who knew each other, like saw each other in the summers on this island.
Yeah.
Um, and in some ways they're shocking one another because one of them has developed a substance abuse issue, and but then in other ways they're acting like they did back in the past. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I just liked that kind of disconnect, because you look back and you're nostalgic and you romanticize and you kind of, these times would have been so special, like surely that's enough to carry you through, but the fact is, like, the difference between when you were a teenager, and then even 10 years later, like, and I just look, but you have that, is cognitive dissonance the right word I'm looking for here, that where you have these people whom you feel to the absolute core,
Yeah.
but now, like, actually, no, you're like wildly different people, really. So I love that kind of. Uh, that again, it's all about the thriller. It's all about unsettling. It's all about
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Like, so you think you're getting these people, you're getting one thing, but these people are totally different. Like, you would have trusted these people with your life back then, but now, are they coming to kill you? So I just really enjoyed that, and
Yeah.
I think we could all relate to that. Somebody who was really important to us at one point, and it's not that you necessarily even fell out. It's just you grew up,
You
and
became different people as you
and
grew up.
it's sad. There's a real,
Yeah.
I think, a sadness there in that, like,
Yeah.
because you want to hold on to these glorious halcyon days forever, and just you can't. Maybe I'm just a sad.
No, no, no. I at least maybe we're sad together, Trina. We can be sad together. I think it's relatable too, and I think maybe because I think the most honest thrillers and crime novels and horror novels. Sorry, I keep lumping that in, but I do feel like that's like a distant cousin of crime and thriller.
Yeah, no, no, I agree.
Um, are most honest when it captures, no matter how zany the premise, when it captures something that the reader or viewer can relate to. And I
Mm.
think that fear of like this person I used to be close to is not close to me anymore can be really jarring and can be a fear for a lot of people. Um, or just I mean, there's no. I don't think it's a surprise that there are so many thrillers where people get married and then the husband or wife start acting differently. There's the idea of like, can you ever really know anyone? That
Mm.
comes up time and again in thrillers. Um, Let me see. I do have just a few other questions. This one, I said we might get into constructively critical territory. This is really the only nitpick that I'll talk about.
Sure.
Nora is a 26-year-old crime novelist. She seems to have had some level of success because that's her only job. But her job is only trotted out when we need a reason for why she'd know something. On the flip side of that, I also feel like Nora makes a lot of very poor decisions. For instance, she doesn't demand a solicitor right away. That's a lawyer for any Americans listening. She doesn't demand a lawyer right away when the police start questioning her, which my advice, if you're ever questioned by the police, no matter how innocent you are, get a lawyer. She goes back, well, sorry, spoiler alert. Okay, everyone fast forward 5 seconds if you want to. Spoiler alert, she goes back to the scene of the crime, these sorts of things. So for a crime writer, I don't think that she's very savvy. How do you feel about this? Like, do you like to write your detective characters, or, and I use that phrase detective character, whether that's their official job or just the person sleuthing. Do you like to write your characters self-aware or write them a bit dumb so the reader can go, no, don't open that door, so the reader can feel smart? Is there a balance to strike?
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I think I would. Yeah, I would have an issue with that as well. They have to be. For me, I need to the that as you say that detective character to be smart. She might not have all the facts in front of her. She might not, but if she's not acting logically consistently, it annoys me. I would agree. It's funny, I didn't pick that up as much. Again, I'm looking at it now. You've mentioned it and kind of going, oh, yeah, yeah, maybe a bit like, but uh, maybe because this is her first book, maybe we'll forgive her, for that. But yeah, no, it should, and I'm like yourself, like I yell, demand is, a lawyer anytime I'm
Yeah.
watching a show. Like one of my favorite shows is, I don't know if you ever watched Castle. It's
Oh,
very silly show, very silly show. A writer works with the New York PD to solve crimes. It's
that's
a
the
lovely,
one with Nathan
lovely.
Fillion, right?
Yes, that's
Yep.
it. Absolutely love it. It's very silly. But every time they bring somebody in to be questioned, they never ask for their solicitor, their lawyer. And I just sit there going, shut up, shut up, shut up. Don't say a word.
Yeah.
Look at your lawyer. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, it needs to be credible. Everything has to tack up. I don't want anything in my books that you wouldn't do yourself and you wouldn't think yourself, because then if it takes you out, if your reader's going, well, that's stupid. Why would you?
Yeah.
You're an intelligent person, So I think you have to avoid that. And yeah, I think I would have a trouble arguing with you that isn't a criticism.
Yeah.
Um,
For the record, I do not think that that ruins my enjoyment of this novel at all. There were just a couple of times where I was like,
yeah.
Nora,
Oh,
babe,
well done.
what are
Yeah.
you doing? Come on, lady.
Mm.
Yeah, honestly, I think that feels like a good question to end it on, aside from just now that we've talked about a comp title of yours, I wondered if you would feel comfortable telling us a little bit more about your books and telling us also what's next for Trina Walsh.
Oh, these are good questions.
As a
What's next?
writer, I realize we contain multitudes and
What's next for me is Chinese takeout and finish
oh
the book I'm talking about, work out wherever it is, Boston, New York, wherever it is. But I think the hero's going to win the day, whatever happens. Uh, so what's next? So yeah, The Party is the latest book. So it's funny now when I was again kind of talking to you about this. Um, in a Dark Dark Wood is nearly like a meld of my first two books, in that the second one, and again, obviously it was in the back of my head influencing me in some fashion. The Party is set in a wood. There's in a house in the middle of a wood, and it's isolated. So and again, a lot of the same kind of themes, a lot of kind of our main character in that is a character called Lizzie, and they had a big trauma in their past, and the whole family had difficulty dealing with it, and she turned to drink, and but she's just got herself back together. And it's a lot about, again, you were talking about friends, can we ever really know anybody? And again, Lizzie, this character, she's just everyone just writes her off as unreliable, which she's the one who caused all the problems. Anyway, a lot of fun in a wood. Very different things happen, but there is a dead body. That's and then Snowstorm is, I'm looking forward to it being winter again, so I can tell everybody to fall into the snowstorm and enjoy that. But
yes.
so what's next? Yeah, no, there's more. I'm hopefully put together some more plots, and again, I more of keeping people in isolated locations, finding reasons why the mobile doesn't work. Um, but I'm currently working on an idea now, and again, I like. This is touching a lot, I think, what we said. I like to have something that has a unique Irish flavor, but as you say, without the kind of Irish kind of thing.
Yes.
So this one has there's a wonderful, what's not wonderful, there's a miserable Irish legend called the Children of Lear. And it's
Wait, I've heard of this, I think.
oh, excellent! It's really miserable. A guy, the King Lear, he married, or not King Lear. That's a different Lear. He's Lear. He is a king, but
Yes.
he marries a woman. They have four children, but she dies tragically, and then he marries her sister, as you do, and her sister does not lie. He's jealous of his love for his children,
Yes.
and she curses the children, turns them into swans, and
What?
casts them off to lakes to live on miserably for 900 years, and then they turn back into people and die, and that's the end of yeah. Oh yeah, they just die.
Good God. Oh
Yeah.
man. It's like
So
so you're using I know that I know that story because of a course I took in university called Celtic Revival. It was about, the turn of the century movement to like revive
yes,
a bunch of Celtic mythos
yeah,
that Yeats was a huge proponent
yeah,
of, and some other folks whose names I'm unfortunately not recalling right now,
that's
which
good.
of course led into Irish modernism. But so you're almost having a Celtic re-revival. You're basing this next one on the Children of Lear.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to absolutely
Use that.
mention that and suggest that that is absolutely what I'm trying to do. But I like I do think, I've always been fascinated by that legend. So now it's very loosely, it's very tenuous on that, but it's suitably miserable. And I think it's a good one to base a thriller on.
Such a
And
good blurb. Suitably miserable.
absolutely miserable. But so that's what's happening at the moment. That's what I'm working on.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait till that's available for pre-order. I've got obviously your backlist I have to catch up on. But Tríona, you have been an absolute delight. Thank you for being my guinea pig, my first Comp Title Book Club interviewee. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me, and thanks. It's great to chat about. It was great to chat about this book because I said I love this book, and it really had a huge impact on me and my writing. So to get to sit here and have a chat with you about it has been brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We have one question from an audience member that maybe we can close on as some food for thought before you go and have a delightful egg roll. Um, what do you think the difference is between an unreliable narrator and a character who is completely unplausible? Since we spoke a bit about folks who have amnesia, but also like decisions that might be a bit daft. What do you think is towing the line there?
Yeah, no, it's a good. I mean, that's a really good question. And to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of the unreliable narrator. Anyway, I think it's just a little bit convenient. But I suppose, I mean, what you want something that's logically consistent. So if you have, your character, it just has to. Your character can be stupid and do stupid things, but it just needs to tally. It needs to make sense. You need to have set them up that they would make stupid decisions. That they would, And I think that's maybe where Ruth Ware fell down a little bit here. That Nora seems quite savvy, so you would be going, "And why would you do that, Nora? That's not like you." So
Right.
I
Right.
think it's legit, if your character, like Flo, the things Flo did,
Mhm.
absolutely. And some of them you're like, why are you doing that, Flo? But it makes total sense for her, even though they're, stupid and, So I think that, and then the unreliable narrator, I think that's just a device, and it feels like a cheat, in my
Mhm.
opinion. But it was very successful for a good while. So there, I'm not sure whether I answered the question there, but
Okay. Yeah, so like if a character is plausible, perhaps it comes down to consistency of character choices and just common sense, asking yourself, would a person do this and would this character do this? And
yeah,
making sure that that is plausible. So in other words, a character can be a bit daft, but they have to be daft consistently.
yeah, exactly. Because I
Unless
think
unless they have growth, I guess.
well, there
But
is that. There is that. But I
yeah.
mean, we all know people, and we know ourselves. Like God, we've all done
Yeah.
stupid things, But we
Yeah.
know why we did stupid things, I guess, So I think
Yeah.
that might cover it.
I think you did. I think you did a great job. Thank you so much for giving us so many things to mull over as we head off. Um, Tríona Walsh, you can find her at trionawalsh.com. Can you remind me of your socials where people can follow you?
Yeah, so Twitter is the Trina Walsh because somebody already had Trina Walsh.
How
Um,
dare they?
I know, like there is only one Trina. Anyway, and then on Instagram, I'm Trina, just Trina Walsh. So
And to be very clear, for those of you who are listening and are not Irish, Trina is spelled Triona, almost like Fiona, but with a TR, as she very helpfully helped me pronounce the first time that we chatted. All
yeah,
right.
it's not obvious. Sorry.
Thank you all so much for listening. Trina, have a great night. If you want to get a jump on next month's reading, we are going to be sticking with the crime and detective genre. I'll be chatting with humorous crime novelist Lawrence Allen. We'll be talking about the Spellman Files, #1. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, this is Jessica Hatch hosting Comp Title Book Club, signing off.